Welcome everyone back, and so far we've had a really exciting day. We've already covered 3 different panels, and now we're gonna here promptly start the keynote address, where we are extremely lucky to have the former Minister of Defense of Colombia and former Colombian ambassador, the Honorable Juan Pinson, who will share his thoughts really from a Latin American perspective on everything we've been discussing so far. But before we get started, just 2 quick administrative notes for those of you who are just now logging in for the first time. We are offering simultaneous interpretation in Spanish. All you have to do is click on the global icon on the bottom right-hand corner. If you're using a phone, you can hit the more portion of it, and it should pop up the icon. Muchas gracias los participantes que han decidido unirse para esta parte del foro. Sí estamos ofreciendo interpretación simultánea. Si están interesados en escucharlo en español, nada más tienen que apretar el botón que está en la parte inferior a la derecha. Es un icono que parece como el mundo. Y si están usando el teléfono, pueden apretar la parte que dice más o more y te va a aparecer el icono también. The last administrative note is we're offering a Q&A chat window that anyone who is interested in adding some comments or asking questions, we encourage you to please kind of share your thoughts and questions with us. We also encourage that you add your name and organization so we get a little more context of where the question is coming from. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Lieutenant General retired Frederick Rudesheim. He's the director of the Perry Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies. And General Rudesheim was born and raised in Panama and lived there for 18 years. Prior to assuming the directorship role at the Perry Center, he served as the U.S. Security Coordinator for Israel and the Palestinian Authority in Jerusalem. Before that, he was the Vice Director of the Joint Staff. And previous to that, he served as the Commanding General of U.S. Army Staff. Sir, General Rudesheim, thank you very much for kicking this keynote address off, and over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Jim. I'm honored to be here with all of you, and the Perry Center is privileged to co-host this 3rd annual Latin American Security Forum. SAIS has been a great partner over the years. We respect both the institution and its team. In fact, 2 of our faculty members are graduates of SAIS, so the synergy is no surprise. My appreciation in particular is to you, Jim, Lieutenant Colonel Jim Marquardt, and our own Doctora Fabiana Pereira, for their work in structuring this forum and convening distinguished panelists and enthusiastic participants from both the U.S. and Latin America. To all the panelists, moderators, and organizers, we thank you for your valuable contributions to this forum up to this point and beyond. There's an urgency to the security challenges we're discussing today, and confronting these challenges requires a whole of hemisphere effort. It requires not only trusted partners, but a networking of these trusted partners. And I have to add, desgraciadamente, in there lies the rub. I think we have a trust deficit in the hemisphere, one that we must all work to resolve. For those unfamiliar with the Perry Center, we are the Department of Defense's Regional Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies for specifically the Western Hemisphere. The center has been in existence for nearly 25 years, building relationships and trust with defense and security professionals committed to making the Americas a safer and stronger place to live. We foster regional security cooperation and advance security relationships, importantly, by engaging individuals in an environment of open exchange to examine these complex security challenges together, much like what we're doing today. It is in bringing individuals together that we strive to bring nations together. The Perry Center has built strong relationships with alumni and partner institutions throughout the Americas. Our alumni network, comprised of civilian, importantly, and military professionals from 47 countries, work collaboratively to strengthen defense institutions, improve citizen security, and strengthen security partnerships in the region. Our alumni and their respective networks cross ministries, armed services, sectors of society, and of course, countries. The Perry Center is committed to providing opportunities for strategic dialogue and platforms to convene to support their efforts. All this to say, as we look to address regional security challenges together, you can count on us, the Perry Center, to be a trusted partner, to be a collaborative partner, and to help with our engagements throughout the region. Which brings me to the introduction of our keynote speaker. The United States has enjoyed a strong partnership with Colombia in the service of a stable and democratic hemisphere. That partnership was bolstered by the efforts of former Colombian Minister of Defense and Ambassador to the United States, Juan Carlos Pinzon, who himself has been a steadfast partner to the United States and a longtime friend of the Perry Center. We have a collaborative working relationship over many years, and he's honored us with a visit to the center not that long ago. Ambassador Pinson currently serves as a chairman of the advisory board for Virtual Global, a consulting firm on national defense and security, public affairs, and market access. He has a distinguished career with many notable achievements, and I can really only take time to hit a few because I want to get to him and get to his very important remarks. But I have to hit the high points. As the Vice Minister of Defense during the government of President Alvaro Uribe, and from 2006 to 2009, he helped stabilize the internal security landscape in Colombia and oversaw the development of new cooperative agreements with the United States. Under his leadership as Minister of Defense during the government of Juan Manuel Santos from 2011 to 15, the Colombian Armed Forces developed the Sword of Honor campaigns that helped keep the FARC in peace negotiations and resulted in the signing of an agreement in 2016. He's also helped strengthen U.S.-Colombian partnership against transnational organized crime through the U.S.-Colombia Action Plan and led Colombia to become a global partner in NATO. As ambassador to the United States, also for Juan Manuel Santos, he helped achieve approval of the Peace Colombia, or Plan Colombia II, obtaining $450 million in aid per year for the peace process. He helped establish the CEO U.S. Colombia Business Council and was recognized as the best diplomatic delegation in Washington by the World Affairs Council. Ambassador Pinson, muy bienvenido. I welcome you to the forum and invite you now to provide your remarks. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, General Rudesheim. It's a great pleasure to be here with you all. And it's for me an honor to get this invitation, both from the Perry Center, which is very important to me and certainly to this part of the world, to the Western Hemisphere. Your contributions to security, to training our security institutions, and to provide better security policies to the region have been very, very important. And I'm thankful for that. At the same time, I'm very grateful to be here at a SAIS event. I spent time at SAIS, and I will never forget the wonderful classes, the great professors as Dean Cohen, and of course, the wonderful classmates that allow me to understand better strategic thinking and the concepts that allow somehow to balance politics and national security, which not necessarily always align. And to me, that was a great opportunity. And definitely, let me start by saying that my English is rusty, as it happens to many people these days. I've not been able to travel for a long time now. So, I'm not practicing English or other languages as we used to. But still, I'm going to do this presentation in English, and happy to have this opportunity to connect. Final comment is that I wish to be in Washington. I wish we can be having this meeting together and having the coffee in the coffee break and having a lunch while we can have a lunch. Such is life, and hopefully vaccination and science and adaptation will bring us together as soon as possible. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm speaking on security and on challenges better all along Latin America. And of course, I know we are in the middle of a very expert group of people. So none of you will be the first time thinking or discussing about Latin America. But I think always it's fair to understand that Latin America, despite is tried to be seen as a single structure, it is not. There are very big differences among different countries, among different regions. Brazil is Brazil, and it's a country, and for some a continent itself. And they have their own challenges, and they have their own size and their own even I would say world political weight on their own. Then you have Mexico, very close to the United States, and with very specific kind of challenges, from the challenges of drug trafficking and the fact of the weakness of Mexican state in a way, to the advantages of being very close to the United States in terms of trade and somehow change of technology and so on. And definitely there are other countries that are very important, like Argentina, Chile, that has been very, very affected in the past 2 years for different changes that we will discuss later. Definitely Peru, which is a very large country, but full of political changes, not to say crisis, on a day-to-day basis. Central America on its own, the sum of those countries are very challenging in terms of immigration, in terms of transnational crime, and of course in terms of inequality and poverty. And not to forget Colombia, as a part of the United States that has been struggling with crime for a long time. We succeeded at a point, but unfortunately consensus has been broken and things are not as easy as we expected at some point in history. Not to forget Venezuela, which is a force of instability nowadays, not only because what Chavez Maduro have done to their own people and to their own economy and to their own institutions, but somehow how they try to export on different ways their intentions. And I think that's another important thing to mention. So I know this that I just said is very obvious to most of you, but I think it's important to remark, how different might be the region and how differences we might find all along. Now, let me start with a little bit of context. The effects of COVID pandemic have been very dramatic in Latin America. Let me remind you, it has been the hardest hit region in the whole world. Just to remind you, according to IMF 2021 estimations, the world is expected, was basically contracted by minus 3.5. Europe by minus 7.2. Asia, but minus 1.1. But Latin America, but minus 7.4. And when you see the expectations of recovery, the world is expected to grow in 2021 at 5.5. Actually, Asia is the great driver, with China, on the driver's seat with 8.3, and the United States with 5.1, Europe only with 4.2, and Latin America again with only 4.1. That's very slow. That has implied in Latin America the increase in poverty. We have come back to the levels of 10 years ago in terms of extreme poverty and people below the poverty line. It's kind of the pandemic make us lost 10 years of progress and advance. And people can say Latin America was already slow compared to Asia, compared to even to Africa these days. Well, now it's even worse because of what I'm saying. And when you think about unemployment, there are millions of people that lost jobs. Just in the case of Colombia, we're speaking about 3 million people. And when you kind of aggregate the whole region, you're speaking on around 20 to 25 million people that simply lost their source of income. So when you put this in context, then you make an analysis, well, how the region has reacted to the pandemic itself on the healthcare capabilities. Major efforts have been done, as in many places, but definitely the Western world has been really underperforming on this pandemic. The world today has already 2.5 million people that have died out of the COVID. Let me give you some numbers. 800,000 have died in Europe. 500,000, actually 518,000 have died in the United States. Asia, which is quite larger in numbers of population, only accounts 395,000 people. Latin America and the Caribbean, we're almost at 670,000 people that has died out of this. This is very dramatic, and this cannot be underestimated. Now, vaccination is the major expectation these days. Apparently, Israel has done very well. The United States is starting to pick up. Somehow the UK, Europe is struggling. And in Latin America, only Chile has a good story to tell. The rest of the region is doing this in a very slow path, either because we have not get enough vaccines to this moment, or because our logistical systems are very, very limited. So the consequence is that maybe the pandemic is going to wane faster in other parts of the world, and here in Latin America, it's going to be connected for a while. Let me move from this regional context in terms of economics and healthcare to a little bit of politics and the political system. We have elections these days in Ecuador. In Chile, we have not only elections for president some months from now, but we're going to have a constituent assembly coming in the coming months. And definitely in Colombia, we're going to have elections in the year 2022. I think what is more worrisome these days is that populism is taking a new air in Latin America. Some people say that for some populists, the only thing that they need is kind of 1 million people falling into poverty. Well, we're saying here 20 million people in Latin America are falling into poverty. We're moving backwards 10 years. So what they need to do is just build upon, of course, lack of income, lack of effectiveness from the state, the ideas of corruption, and not to forget the desperation of people not really solving their needs. That is creating an environment for populism, and that is creating an environment for successful populist campaigns. We just saw in Ecuador, you know, Correa, who is actually even under investigation and under legal restrictions, was able to handle a 35-year-old candidate to make it even to second round, and depending on how the political forces arrange, their potential to win the elections are very high. In Chile, the most recognized country for economic success, for reduction in poverty, for becoming the country that was being closest to be the advanced economy in Latin America, an OECD country, suddenly starting 2 years ago, because of unemployment, because of lack of meted expectations from young people especially, and now because of the pandemic, suddenly has moved and have shifted towards a, let's say, more socialist, quote unquote, ideas for economics. And probably that's going to be reflected in the incoming Constitutional Assembly. Those are challenges that are there and that we cannot forget. In the case of Colombia, I have to tell you that, of course, for many years, the political establishment that was confronting terrorism and drug trafficking was able to, in a strong way, defeat, at least for the past 30 years, and provide stability, those populist movements that many times were connected either to drug trafficking or to terrorist organizations. By 2016, there was, of course, an agreement, the Havana Agreements. The Havana Agreements somehow provide more benefits than expected to the members of the FARC, and somehow open the road for the recovery of the cocaine business in Colombia, affecting not only Colombia, but of course, the Maduro regime taking advantage out of this, and of course, the Central American countries and Mexico being somehow affected. Not to forget that Latin America has become a consumer as well of these drugs, and is not only the United States and Europe the only markets, but this is a larger market. This environment, with the events coming out of the populism that has been feeded by the pandemic, somehow has created the risk for having an alternative of populism in Colombia. And this is a thing I wanted you to know, because I believe Colombia has been, as of today, not only a partner of the United States, but the country in which we have somehow developed every possible idea coming from Western values, and especially Western concept of rule of law and even human rights values. With all the challenges that we have had, somehow Colombia has been the country that has been advancing onto this. The consequences have been very positive for the past decade and a half. But the challenges ahead, because of what the pandemic has brought and the description that I just gave you, is putting Colombia for the first time as a country that can be, played. That leads me to the fourth element of discussion, the geopolitical struggle and the great power competition. I just listened to the wonderful panel that happened before these comments. And of course, my impression is that it's very clear that there are extra-regional players in Latin America. Most of extra-regional players, let's face it, and let's not forget about this, are here to poke the eyes of the United States. And as simple as it sounds, it's true. Of course, the way to do that is by taking over countries or by moving countries towards their areas of influence. I don't have any doubt that the United States will continue to be the regional hegemon. And I don't have any doubt that any country will like and will expect to continue to have a good relationship with the United States, especially hoping for technology, hoping for cooperation, and no doubt hoping for exports to the US markets. But this worldwide reality is happening. There are many players now in the world, and they are trying to appear here in Latin America. On one hand, you have Iran. Iran is very fully embedded in Venezuela these days, is absolutely embedded in Nicaragua, and of course has strong ties with Cuba. They're seeking to have more ties in the region. What is the concern? Of course, they have become an opponent of the United States. Of course, they are at war in practical terms with Israel, and any day the United States can even be part of that struggle, not anymore on special ops, but probably moving into a more conventional reality. Not to forget that in the middle of all this is this nuclear agreement and so on. It's very worrisome to have Iran already embedded in the region. It's very worrisome to understand that from those platforms, they can think on the way they have reacted in a very effective way, which is asymmetric ways of doing what they do. And on this regard, I have to tell you that here in Colombia, we gotta be concerned because they can use proxies like ELN, like former FARC, or other criminals to even attack inside Colombian territory or regional territories, interests of the United States and Israel. Of course, we have the challenge of presence of Russia. I think Russia is more sophisticated, is still dedicated to sell arms and other interests, but of course they have the platform as well in the countries that I mentioned. In the case of Colombia, recently, the Colombian authorities expelled 2 members of the Russian embassy for spying. And these are things that are somehow coming as new events for the region and for Latin America. So I would put heads up onto that. I think Russia is more pragmatic. They are not a foe as Iran is. But in my opinion, they're here because they want to somehow deter the United States to make presence in their own area of influence. Ukraine, the Baltic states, and of course those countries like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and Armenia and others, where the United States somehow presents with some interest. I think their interest of being here, is kind of a pressure valve against the United States. Then you have Turkey, which is a NATO country, is expected to be a Western ally, and somehow, let's not to forget, they are playing a role, especially one, hoping to sell weapons in the region, and second, in the case of Venezuela, they have been able to take some of the Venezuelan gold into the world markets as part of some dealings. I don't see Turkey as a country hoping to, create their own environment here in Latin America, but I think it's a player that suddenly has come to be visible. And finally, you have China. China is sophisticated. They're here to make business. They're here to make people interested about their technology, their wealth, and their advancements. And they are not, using basic tactics, but in my opinion, they are becoming very strategic. In the case of Colombia, just to give you some examples, in 2 years, suddenly they are more influential than ever. They have the largest infrastructure activity in the country, the build-up of the Metro of Bogota. They have the build-up of the train, the regional train for part of Bogota City. They have a gold mine, and at the same time, they have other investments in infrastructure. That's the way. And frankly speaking, is something that needs to be addressed in a smart way and somehow in a balanced way, because the question is, why a country will not try to sell anything to China? My final point is transnational crime and corruption. The region, and especially those rogue regimes, are very corrupt, but very little has been done against them. And mostly, the actions have been against democracies that are in some way friendly to the United States. Most of the corruption activities or counter activities are being attached to friends of the United States. But very little, I insist, has been done to those rogue regimes that really are predators to the treasury of their own countries and to their own people. In that line, those regimes, I'm speaking specifically on Venezuela, are surviving out of transnational crime. Transnational crime from illicit drugs and illegal gold and coltan mining have been happening, especially from Colombia, for a long time. But now it is giving the opportunity to the Venezuelan regime to be able to sustain, and to the Mexican cartels to become stronger. You may not only challenge the Mexican state, but at the same time, they have become challengers of the United States and the democracies as we know them. That is very important because part of the immigration issues that are happening out of Venezuela and Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador, these days are very much linked to the success of these illegal economies and, to be practical, the lack of economic opportunity in other fields for the people. Of course, I can speak for hours, as they said, especially in these interesting issues, but I just wanted to make these remarks, and General Rudesheim, I'm happy to establish a conversation and make some comments.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, first of all, just a comment. Your English, if we would all like our English to be as rusty as yours, all right? Because you haven't lost a step. I've got some questions coming in, but I'd like to tee it off with something that I thought was extremely provocative that you said, and I'd like to go back and let you elaborate if you like. because of as you were laying out context in the environment of COVID-19, the pandemic, and you pointed out regionally, when you compare to the other regions of the world, how much worse off Latin America has been. And I think you stated, if I had it correctly, that we really, the region has taken a step back perhaps 10 years. And then you pointed out that as you went into your further points on politics and elections, that populism has gained traction, pointing back to the previous point about how there has been a significant decrease in an economic benefit, and that populism, that's been fertile ground for populism. And I think the argument goes in your own Colombia and in other places. So I want to turn that into a question following your observations. So, ¿qué hacemos? You know, this is the trend. This pandemic will pass, but it's going to take a while. We have taken a step back. If the numbers, and the numbers are what they are, but we don't want to concede the ground. So and this is not just, you can speak about just Colombia, but if you want, your remark could be more broad about what could the region do to try to reestablish and push back on this concern of a growing populism. Over.
Well, I think, General Rudesheim, that the first thing I will tell you, you have been a soldier, you're a soldier, and I will come back to you with the same sentiment. We have to fight for this part of the world. We cannot allow these countries to fall into populism, but we need to be strategic. It's not just about a will, but it's about doing several things. In my opinion, the first thing we need to do is really to use all capabilities and all sources of funding to recover the economy of the region as soon as we can. And I think, and I'm advocating this even in Colombia, for social safety net programs that imply, frankly speaking, tons of money to the pockets of Colombians, because we cannot allow them to fall further, and at the same time, we need them to start consuming again and somehow to reduce the risk of falling into poverty. That's the obvious one, short-term one. The second one, vaccination. My concern, well, the Western world, despite what we thought that was the stronger in healthcare systems and technology, suddenly we failed. The only great news about the pandemic has been how in less than a year, science of the Western world was able to bring vaccines. But the challenge now is, especially in Latin American countries, how do we give them on time? How do we do this as fast as we can with all the cooperation we can get in order to make this faster and reopen the economy and somehow make the economies work at the level that they can, at their potential? The third one, I think, is very important for the United States, and I'm trying to speak to the US public here. I think the US needs to take care of their own reality about what is going on in Asia. I understand that the United States needs, as a world power, to balance its presence in Asia. But the pandemic proved that everything is produced these days in China, India, Vietnam, or Indonesia. And we need to produce in this part of the world. I mean, I think that happened some 20 years ago, 25 years ago, because, of course, the decision that the Chinese did well, the creation of special economic zones, and, frankly speaking, very low cost for labor. We need to figure out how to do this in Latin America. We have low-cost labor as compared to advanced countries. And if we can, we always speak about education. Well, we don't need to educate everybody the same day, but we need to create some clusters of education so technology companies can come to Latin America and they can establish here and somehow be providers. That will be jobs. That will be technology transfers. That will be opportunities. If we don't think like that, we will be losing the opportunity of what the pandemic show us, and is somehow reestablishing the whole value chain of logistics all along the world. Let's not put Latin America out of this game, because, I mean, if we recover the economy, if we vaccinate in an effective way, if we create some structural solutions to long term, that's great. The fourth element is back to my old business. Let's not be weak with drug trafficking and illegal mining. It's not only against environment. The destruction of environment in a country like Colombia, of the tropical forest, coming out of cocaine and coming out of extracting illegally gold and coltan, is very destructive. It's really harming, you know, the future of this part of the world and vis-a-vis climate change effect. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed strongly. Some people, because of the Havana Agreement, that frankly speaking, partially failed in Colombia. We have to recognize that. Colombia is not at full peace, not even at peace, I would say. Still, we have 24 per 100,000 inhabitants homicide rate. You know, no other Latin country will have those numbers, with the exception of Venezuela these days, by different reasons. So we need to address this transnational crime. That transnational crime is benefiting Maduro, Chavez regime, is benefiting Ortega, somehow is benefiting Cuba, is benefiting the Mexican cartels, and is affecting the regional democracies, Colombia, definitely Ecuador. You saw that ELN money somehow was able to transpire into the candidate from Correa in Ecuador. You see what is going on in Honduras, in Guatemala, even in Panama, and definitely Mexico. So we have to reestablish the idea of cooperation and strength to fight these transnational crime sources. I think that's very important. So those will be my elements to bring us as a policy option right now.
Thanks very much. Let me turn now to some of the questions that have come in, and I think I'm going to try to distill a couple of them. So to get you enfocado, the topic turns to Venezuela, and in specific, the effects of the migration or immigration, more specifically, and its risks to Colombia, and then of course, if you choose to talk about those risks to the broader region. So this is part of the much broader question of how to deal with Venezuela. Obviously, this is a very important strategic level issue for your country, Colombia. So if you would address, please, the immigration issue, and then, should you desire, to talk a little bit about how the region might take on the declining narco state of Venezuela. Over.
Well, first of all, let me praise President Duque. He made a very important decision by basically creating a status for all these Venezuelan immigrants that have come to Colombia in need, in poverty, you know, with no bread, and running out of violence and insecurity created by the Maduro regime. I think that was a very important move. That was, you know, many people speak about humanitarian approach. That was not even humanitarian. That was the right thing to do. And I think President Duque and Colombia somehow deserve some credit for this. Now, it's very worrisome that the international community has not done what they have did or what they did in Syria. In Syria, there were thousands, millions of dollars moving to support, you know, the refugees coming out of that war. The ones that have come out of Venezuela have been mainly supported by Colombia and in a way by the US programs, but nobody else have done anything with them. And that's a real thing we need to care, because it's a real challenge. Now, let me speak from the Venezuela challenge, which is not Venezuela challenge. You know, you were born in Panama, so you are an expert in this region. And you know, Venezuela, Colombia, and I would say even Panama, we were Siamese brothers. We were born the same day, same hour, same time. We were the same people at the end. So I don't think there's a problem between Venezuela, Colombia, or so. There's a problem with the Maduro regime. And the reasons are the following. First, Maduro hosts and protects the leaders of the FARC, the leaders of the ELN, and drug trafficking and illegal mining. Now, those two activities are even sources of funding for his regime, which is very delicate and very dramatic. And terrorists are planning out of Venezuela, from inside Venezuela, to make attacks into Colombian people, into Colombian infrastructure, and even terrorist attacks to the police and military. So it's a real threat, and it's a real aggression. Second, immigration is something that I described already. President Duque welcome, Colombians welcome in general, but let's face it, it creates problems, social problems, economic problems, and security problems, because some of the Venezuelans that come are coming for seeking illegal activities as well, you know, picking up some of the insecurity in our country. And finally, some of those immigrants are used as intelligence assets. They have been coming into the country to contribute to the vandalism and instability activities that we have seen in the past 2 years in Colombia. So that's a little bit of what is going on, and this is why we need to keep saying this to the world. Now, how to handle this? If I can criticize the previous administration of the United States, I will criticize that they were very vociferous, but they were not very much into action. Sanctions are not enough. And I think Europe and the United States need to become stronger on these stands. Because the problem in Venezuela is not just Venezuela itself. It's now harming Colombia, but it's harming the region as a whole. And it's setting a very bad sample of having a narco state that has corrupted even the treasury of the Venezuelan people, and that have come against the Venezuelan people. But not also that, they are being used as a platform against the United States, from Iran, as I described, even Russia, and somehow China, in a way. It's something that we cannot just think as a little problem. For Colombia, it's a day-to-day problem. And we will need to find ways to move onto this struggle. I think that the more the Venezuelan people coming out of Venezuela, the immigrants, the refugees, feel that they have an opportunity, that they are being taken care of, hopefully they might have a comeback. But if we do what has happened with the Cuban people in South Florida, that you just host them, but there's no comeback, the consequence is that you have already a 70-year-old regime hoping to fall apart by their misbehaviors every day, but it's not going to happen. So I think we're building up the same story just next to Colombia, here in Venezuela, with the all risks that creates for Venezuelans, but definitely for Colombia and the whole region.
Thank you. Again, sobering words, but again, as direct as always. Let me turn again to some of the questions that came in. This one from Cecily Fasanella from the Wilson Center and George Washington University. It's a bit specific to illegal mining. She says, illegal mining not only presents great dangers in terms of fueling international organized crime, but also presents great dangers for environmentalism or environmentalists, particularly in Colombia. How can Colombia government best protect environmentalists and many who have continued to face violence despite the 2016 peace accords?
So Colombia is very much committed with COP21 and COP24 and all these environmental agreements that are happening to the world. And I think that it will continue to be an interest. And by the way, Colombian government has different policies for environmental protection. That's a nice part. But being very straightforward, the best way to protect Colombian environmentalists and environmental wealth is going after criminals. When we have been able to reduce deforestation, when we have been able to reduce the contamination of rivers, that has been when we have been able to go after terrorism and all different ways of crime. So we need an international idea of cooperation against illegal gold mining. Let me give you one idea that I have been sharing with many of the US officials on my previous life and positions. I've been telling, we need to create a certificate of origin for gold. You know, when you find cocaine, at the end, cocaine continues to be illegal everywhere. So when you get a cocaine package, I mean, you can seize it and you can destroy it and you can really harm the finances. We need to do more of that, by the way. We need to keep doing more and more of that because of what I described. But with gold and coltan, that's a big problem. Because gold and coltan have a market everywhere in the world, you know, and it's legal. So people never ask where gold is coming, where coltan is coming. They just get it and they just sell it. If we were able to define a certificate of origin that implies where it was produced, and by the way, who was the owner, it was a terrorist organization, it was a criminal organization, that can at least make their life more difficult and make the alternative of destroying the environment even better. Finally, I think that Colombian security forces since the year 2013 have started to create the idea of environmental protection. Brazil has been very successful doing that, by the way. Brazilian military has a lot of doctrine on protecting the Amazon. I think we are learning on our own way, but at the same time, taking some of the Brazilian ideas to become more effective onto that doctrine as a national security priority.
Thank you. And let me turn to yet another question. This one from Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Rodney Siepersand, alumni of the Perry Center. He wrote that in there. I wasn't trying to sell that. It was thought that supporting Juan Guaido as a legitimate interim leader of Venezuela would have successfully placed pressure on Maduro for him to step down, but that failed. So what alternative would he asked what Colombia suggests, and so obviously this is your opinion, suggest for a transition of leadership in Venezuela. So we can't get away from Venezuela, but this is about transitioning Venezuela. ¿Qué piensas, señor embajador?
And because, you know, Venezuela is harming, the Maduro regime is also harming Trinidad and Tobago, and it's harming every neighbor, it's harming the whole region. That's a part we need to not forget and become stronger and stronger. Sometimes people get tired of policies, and suddenly we change. My invitation is to keep being effective and keep the pressure. Keep the pressure. That will be the first thing. Now, Juan Guaido policy, nowadays it looks like a failed intention in a way, but it still continues to harm and to make Maduro's regime life uncomfortable. So why not to continue to support the opposition by, you know, still giving them some room and some space? Looks like the world got tired of that, and in a way they have, you know, shifted to, you know, make Maduro's life more comfortable. I think we should not. I think we should continue to use the Lima group. I think we need to continue to use the European Union. I think the United States and Canada need to continue to pressure. And I think we need to go now after their illegal finances. Because of course, sanctions were effective against oil. But now we need to go after gold and after cocaine, which is allowing them to succeed. This is why supporting Colombia on its fight against those criminal organizations, those terrorist organizations that are, you know, being seated in Venezuela these days, is extremely important. And I think that's a way to continue to make the pressure. Now, I wish to see the Venezuelan regime to fall by the push and will of the Venezuelan people. Frankly speaking, they deserve that. But I don't think that's going to happen easily. So we need to be realistic. By being realistic, the pressure needs to be resulted in a political negotiation that implies, Maduro to leave, but somehow elections that allow them to compete. That's the way. And, the Venezuelan opposition has also a challenge, how to unify. It's easy to say. As of today, extremely difficult for that to happen. And that's a real challenge.
Thanks very much. I'm going to pose one last question for you, and thanks once again for not only your words but your direct follow-up comments. But this one goes to great power competition, and I think it's a good one to kind of wrap up on, because we've heard throughout today various panelists talking about China primarily, but other external state actors with regards to Latin America, and we've heard there's also sort of an undercurrent that for China in particular, it's business, that it's not that there's a common value set, but it's just business. And they've replaced the United States in particular as the primary trade partner in many countries. And these countries, and I personally have heard it, have said, in a one-on-one kind of conversation, we really like you, the U.S., but it's just business. It's just business. And they're giving us a better deal. Sir, Mr. Ambassador, you just mentioned that they've got the largest business proposition going on right now in Colombia, presumably because they gave you all a good deal. And so ahí está. So this is going to move on into the future. And so what if you could offer a better counter or a better formulation than just be with us because we're the good guys and we believe in democracy, it's not a China bad. I think we've gotten away from that very unsophisticated argument, but we have said China is got predatory practices, and so you have to be careful. By the way, same country will say, hey, we're smart enough to realize what we're signing up for. We got it. We're not going to sign a bad deal. Presumably, again, Colombia didn't sign a bad deal in order to get its transportation system rectified. So, va la pregunta. What is a more sophisticated and useful counter if, in fact, there needs to be a counter? You could propose something else to the increasing increasing presence of China primarily, and then other state actors in this region. Over.
It's a very long reflection, which I understand, because there's no easy answer. And it's a tough question and no easy answer. But I would put a little bit of a bet into nearshoring. Bringing American technology, American companies, American investment into Latin America as a policy decision is probably what you might require, as you did it in Europe during the Marshall Plan time. I think that's the way to really, enhance the interest of the region about the United States, solving problems, but at the same time really connecting to a next generation of relationship. Because to be fair, why not to sell in China? That's a big question always, Why not to get, an economic relationship with a country that at the end is not lecturing you about human rights or other kind of political values. By the way, I'm very much a friend of the United States on every level, but my point is you need to reflect about these concepts. When you do business with China, they will not come to discuss safeguards with you. They will come to discuss with you terms. When you do anything with the United States, and have a very strong relationship, you have a human rights agenda, you have an environmental agenda, you have all the right set of democratic values that matter. I'm not against those, but we need to be creative then on connecting those values with the benefits. And the benefits are, in my opinion, related to technology transfer, education, jobs, and business. And I think this needs to be figured out, because the way China is competing with the United States right now is an easy way. And this is why they're becoming so effective. They just need to bring capital and business and do it at a low cost. And they will continue to succeed. And by the way, there are 1.4 billion Chinese that you want to sell a bean to each of them because it's profitable. So I think what needs to be done is a little bit to find a new way to engage with the region, coming out of nearshoring that at the end of the pandemic brings the opportunity, but it's not just doing a PowerPoint of nearshoring. It's really seeing when Microsoft, Apple, and all these big tech companies and all these wonderful American powerhouses will engage massively with the region as their powerhouses. Hard to say, because if you think of markets, maybe that's an unwise market decision. But if you think in geopolitical terms, maybe you need to find a way to do it. And that's what I will, leave in the table as of now.
Mr. Ambassador, once again, thank you so very, very much for your presentation and, again, your candid remarks over the last 25 minutes or so. I'll turn it back over to Jim Marquardt. And again, muchísimas gracias, and I hope to see you very soon, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you so much, General Rudesheim. See you soon.
Yeah, and sir, General Rudesheim, thank you very much. Ambassador Pinson, also thank you. Also, and as I mentioned before this, Dean Cohn really gives his personal thank you. And when we let him know that you were talking, he said, "Oh, he was one of my students, but he was so gracious in hosting me a number of times in Colombia." So a personal thanks from him as well. And thank you very much for giving us your perspective, especially as an expert from Latin America on the whole entire theme for today. With that being said, that concludes our keynote address, and we have one panel left, which will be starting at 3 p.m. And that panel will be pressing up and powering up climate change and energy dynamics in the region. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating, and look forward to seeing everyone here at 3 p.m.